Welcome to today's extraordinary story. It may sound unbelievable, but a single bowl of spilled soup was enough to change one man's entire life. Our story: waiter spilled soup on the CEO. The apology turned into $1 billion idea will take you from an embarrassing accident in a restaurant to an incredible journey where sincerity, courage, and one bold idea open the door to $1 billion future. Across 8 chapters, you'll witness dramatic twists, humor, heartfelt moments, and above all, an inspiring lesson. No mistake is ever wasted if you know how to turn it into an opportunity. Stay with us until the end to discover how one apology became a historic turning point. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. The restaurant La Belle Étoile in the heart of New York City was infamous for 2 things: its dazzling luxury and its prices high enough to make ordinary folks faint at the door. This was where the ultra-rich dined, where CEOs closed deals, and where people loved to show off. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, silverware clinked like a symphony of wealth. In a corner near the bar, young waiter David clutched a tray, his hands trembling. He'd only been working here for 3 weeks, yet every day felt like a survival test. His colleagues glided across the floor as if dancing, while David looked like a man learning to walk on a tightrope. Sweat dampened the back of his crisp white shirt. "David, table 7! Hurry, they ordered soup!" the manager hissed. Table 7 was none other than Richard Grant, a notorious Wall Street CEO, famous for his ruthless temper and piercing stare that could turn anyone's knees to jelly. David took a deep breath, lifting the steaming bowl of soup. "All right, just walk straight. Don't look around. Don't shake your hands. Easy," he whispered to himself as though stepping through a minefield. But fate had other plans. A customer suddenly pulled back a chair. David swerved, and the entire bowl of soup splashed right onto Richard Grant's Armani suit. The restaurant froze. Gasps echoed around the room. Everyone waited for an explosion. Not from the soup, but from the CEO. Richard slowly set down his spoon, narrowed his eyes at David. His elegant grey suit was now an abstract painting, scented with onions. David's face drained of colour. His mind raced with nightmares. Being fired, sued, maybe even blacklisted. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to," he stammered, fumbling for napkins and only making a bigger mess. Some guests chuckled. A lady in pearls whispered, "He's done for. Grant will never forgive that." All waited for the storm, but Richard only dabbed his sleeve, then let out a dry, mocking laugh. "You know, young man," he said in a deep, commanding voice, "on Wall Street, one small mistake can cost billions. So, how do you plan to fix yours?" The question hung in the air like a blade, and David's heart nearly stopped. Little did anyone know, this humiliating moment would spark an idea that would shake Wall Street itself. David swallowed hard, his heart pounding like a war drum. Never before had he felt so many eyes glued to him. Clutching a useless napkin, he stammered, "Sir, I'll do anything to make it right. I'll pay you back somehow. I'm truly sorry." At once, the nearby table erupted in mocking laughter. A man in a navy suit smirked. "Pay him back? With a waiter's salary? That might cover a single Armani button." David wished the floor would swallow him whole. But Richard Grant didn't explode the way everyone expected. Instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, studying David like a hawk. The air grew so tense that even the faint clink of silverware at the next table sounded deafening. "Do you know why I hate mistakes?" Richard asked slowly, his voice deep and commanding. David shook his head nervously. Richard leaned forward, lowering his tone but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Because mistakes kill opportunities. One drop of ink can ruin an entire contract. 1 second of hesitation can lose a whole market. And 1 bowl of soup," he stressed, eyes glinting with sarcasm, "can turn a luxury dinner into a comedy show." Guests chuckled, some nodding in agreement. David's cheeks burned, sweat dripping down his temples. But in that humiliation, a strange spark lit up inside him. He remembered his father's words. "If you mess up, don't just apologize. Make them remember you for it." David drew a deep breath, locking eyes with Richard. "You're right, sir. A small mistake can destroy an opportunity. But what if it creates a new one instead?" The table fell silent. A few eyebrows lifted. Richard paused mid-motion, no longer wiping his suit, his gaze sharpening with curiosity. "And what exactly are you suggesting, young man?" Richard asked, his voice no longer angry but intrigued. David pressed his lips together. He didn't yet have a full plan, but a bold idea was already taking shape, an idea that would soon change his entire life. The luxurious restaurant felt frozen in time. Conversations died down, and every eye locked on table 7. Everyone waited to see what more this clumsy waiter could possibly say. David swallowed hard, his voice echoing in his own head. "If mistakes kill opportunities," he said slowly, "then the only way to survive is to turn a mistake into the beginning of something bigger." Some guests snickered. "Sounds like a bargain bin philosopher," a businessman muttered. But Richard didn't laugh. Instead, the corner of his mouth curled slightly, intrigued. "You spilled soup on me, and now you're lecturing me?" Richard asked, his tone equal parts mocking and curious. David drew a deep breath. Ideas he'd scribbled late at night in a cheap notebook came flooding back. An idea for an app that could help restaurants manage mistakes, reduce waste, and improve customer experience. But he had never dared to share it. Who would listen to a nameless waiter? "No, sir. I'm not lecturing you," David replied, his voice steadier now. "But I believe if there were a system smart enough, it wouldn't let a spilled bowl of soup turn into a public disaster. It would turn the mistake into an opportunity, an unforgettable service experience, and I have an idea to make that happen." The restaurant buzzed with whispers. A lady at the next table gasped, "Oh my God, is he pitching a business idea right now?" Richard leaned his elbow on the table, chin resting on his hand, his gaze sharp and unblinking. A mere waiter who thinks he can teach the entire hospitality industry how to run itself. "Interesting. Go on, boy." "I'm listening." David's heart pounded wildly. In that instant, fear of losing his job transformed into an unexpected stage, and he knew this was his moment. Either seize it or lose everything. The restaurant now felt like a stage. Curious stares, annoyed frowns, and amused smirks mixed across the room. A few guests even pulled out their phones, recording this bizarre scene. A clumsy waiter who had just spilled soup, now standing tall before one of New York's most powerful CEOs, pitching a startup. David swallowed, but his eyes gleamed with determination. "I've seen restaurants lose customers over the smallest mistakes. Employees fired, guests walking away, everyone loses. But what if there were a tech platform that tracked feedback instantly, recorded mistakes, and turned them into an opportunity to make it right? Imagine this: when I spilled the soup, the system would immediately trigger an apology, a personalized voucher, maybe even a surprise gesture that makes the guest feel valued instead of insulted." The room went quiet. Even the jazz music seemed to soften. Richard raised an eyebrow, his finger tapping rhythmically on the table. His anger had shifted into calculation. A bold idea, but what makes you think it's even possible? David drew in a deep breath. He had no capital, no prestige, no impressive degrees, but he had belief, and he knew this was the moment he could not waste. "Give me the chance to prove it," David said firmly, no longer trembling. "If I'm wrong, I'll accept any consequence. But if I'm right, you'll have an idea worth billions." Whispers surged through the restaurant like waves. Some laughed at the audacity. Others sighed and shook their heads. But everyone could see it. The young waiter had turned humiliation into a bold challenge. Richard narrowed his eyes, lips curling into a half-smile, half-skeptical smirk. "You're reckless. But sometimes recklessness is what makes history." The chandelier lights glimmered over table 7, where a cold-blooded CEO and a trembling young waiter had just set the stage for the first turning point of this story. After Richard's half-mocking nod, the restaurant buzzed like a hive. Guests whispered. Some even placed quiet bets. "That kid will be jobless tomorrow. If he's lucky, he might get the CEO's autograph as a souvenir." But Richard didn't storm out as expected. Instead, he gestured to the manager. "Bring us your finest bottle of wine. Tonight, we'll have an interesting conversation," Richard commanded, his voice cool yet commanding. David froze for a moment, stunned he hadn't been fired on the spot, but that only made his pulse race faster. This was no longer humiliation. It was a test. Richard raised his glass, his eyes sharp as steel. "All right, waiter, convince me your idea isn't just hot air. I've seen hundreds of startups burst like fireworks, only to vanish like soap bubbles weeks later. So tell me, what do you have besides sweat and a stained uniform?" The room erupted again, muffled chuckles rising from the tables. But David didn't flinch. He remembered all those late nights working shifts, watching trays of food wasted, colleagues berated for a single slip-up. He had thought countless times, Is there a way so no one is treated like they're disposable over one mistake? David set the tray aside, standing straighter than ever. You're right, sir. All I have are these hands and this uniform. But I also have a vision. One I believe no one in this room has ever seen, at least not from the eyes of a waiter. The room fell silent. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was attention. Richard raised an eyebrow, perhaps for the first time that evening, genuinely intrigued. A vision, huh? Fine. Let's hear it. The chandelier lights shimmered across the wine glasses, as if signaling that a battle of minds had just begun. David drew a deep breath, forcing down the trembling in his chest. Every eye was fixed on him, from curious guests to silent waiters watching from the sidelines. He knew one wrong word could ruin him, but the right words might change his life forever. Mr. Grant, David began, his voice steadier now. I've worked in the service industry for years, and I realize something. Customers don't leave a restaurant because of slow service or even mediocre food. They leave because they feel disrespected when mistakes happen. Several guests nodded. An elderly woman whispered, Exactly. Last time they forgot my order, they didn't even bother to apologize. David pressed on, his tone firmer. We live in the age of technology. Everything is tracked, recorded, optimized. Yet restaurants still run like they did decades ago. Handwritten notes, verbal reminders, and hope the staff remembers. One small slip, like the one I just made, can ruin the entire experience. But if there were a platform that instantly recorded the mistake, suggested a solution, and delivered an immediate act of service right in front of the guest, that mistake could turn into a strength. The room buzzed again. A man in a brown suit scoffed, a waiter teaching the entire industry to go digital. Ridiculous. But instead of laughter, several guests looked thoughtful. Richard stayed silent, swirling his wine. His eyes glinted with calculation. Sounds appealing, but give me an example. How exactly does a mistake turn into an advantage? David answered without hesitation. For example, when I spilled soup on you, if the system I imagine existed, you would have instantly received a message from the restaurant. We sincerely apologize and would like to offer you a complimentary dinner next time. At the same time, a manager would be alerted to personally apologize and make amends. You wouldn't feel dismissed. You'd feel valued. And instead of leaving in anger, you might actually tell your friends, this restaurant knows how to take care of its customers. A smattering of applause broke out from a corner of the room, startling David. It wasn't the guests. It was a few waiters who couldn't help but clap for him. Richard raised an eyebrow. For the first time that night, a real smile curved his lips, though it carried more calculation than joy. You make a fair point, but ideas are cheap, boy. What I want to know is, how will you turn it into reality? The chandelier lights glittered overhead, as though spotlighting David. This was the question. The line that would decide whether his idea stayed a dream, or became the first step toward a billion-dollar empire. David stood silent for a few seconds. Richard's question cut through the air like a knife. Whispers rose again. He's got nothing but talk. Everybody's got ideas. Execution is what counts. And they weren't wrong. David had no capital, no MBA, no reputation, but he had something else. Meticulous observation and lived experience. He lifted his head, his voice slow but firm. I don't have money or fancy degrees, but I have data most big players never see. Data from inside the life of a waiter. I know what customers complain about, where staff make mistakes, and which inefficient routines exhaust both sides. And I've documented it all for years. From his shirt pocket, he pulled out a small, battered notebook. He placed it on the table in front of Richard. In here, David said, his hand trembling but his eyes burning with conviction, are hundreds of real-life cases I've witnessed. Long wait times, wrong bills, disasters like tonight. I didn't just apologize and move on. I wrote down every detail, and I drafted solutions for every mistake. The room fell dead silent. Even the earlier mockery vanished. Richard stared at the notebook, his finger tapping lightly on the table. His eyes flickered with something between surprise and intrigue. How long have you been recording this? Richard asked, his voice low but commanding. 4 years, sir, David replied without hesitation. Since the day I started waiting tables to pay for school. Every page here is sweat, failure, and a lesson learned. A murmur of awe swept across the restaurant. Guests no longer looked at David as a clumsy waiter, but as someone with vision. Richard smirked, flipping through a few pages. He skimmed over cramped handwriting, crude diagrams, even coffee stains. Finally, he chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. You're reckless. But maybe recklessness is exactly what this market needs. David clenched his fists, his heartbeat thundering. For the first time in his life, he felt a spark of real hope. Richard flipped through a few more pages of the notebook, pausing at a scribbled note. Customer complained after waiting 20 minutes for a simple salad. Staff apologized, but the customer never returned. He chuckled, his tone half mocking, half impressed. You're stubborn and persistent, but ideas and data aren't enough. The world is full of dreamers, and most of them disappear before they ever prove themselves. David stood tall, eyes locked on Richard. So what do you want me to do to prove it? Richard set the notebook down, leaning forward, his gaze sharp as a blade. I don't invest in dreams. I invest in results. If you really believe in this system that turns mistakes into opportunities, then prove it. Right here. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Guests leaned forward, watching as if it were a high-stakes chess match. David frowned slightly. What do you mean? Richard's lips curved into a cold, challenging smile. In 1 week, you will use whatever you can, paper, phone, even just your brain, to create the first prototype of what you just preached, a real model, something that can work in this very restaurant. If you succeed, I'll consider investing. If you fail, then tonight was nothing but a joke. The room buzzed with whispers. Some shook their heads. A week? Impossible. But others' eyes gleamed, realizing Richard was serious, and the young waiter was being handed a once-in-a-lifetime chance. David bit his lip. He had nothing but a notebook and scraps of self-taught tech knowledge, but he also knew, if he walked away, he'd regret it forever. Drawing in a deep breath, he looked Richard squarely in the eye. Fine, 1 week. I'll show you that tonight's mistake is only the beginning. Richard laughed, the sound echoing under the crystal chandeliers, tightening the tension in the air. Good, he said. Tonight, a bowl of soup has become a $1 billion promise. Let's see if you can keep it. David's eyes blazed with fire. In that moment, he knew his life had just turned a new page. That night, after the last guests had left, David finally walked out of the restaurant. New York's streets glowed with neon lights, but all he felt was the weight of time slipping through his fingers. 1 week, just 7 days to turn a spark of an idea into something real. He sank onto the back steps of the restaurant, flipping through his battered notebook. Scribbled notes danced under the street lamp. His mind churned with questions. Where do I even start? Who would believe me? How can I build a prototype with no money, no team? His old phone buzzed. A text from his dorm mate, Mark, a computer science student. Yo, still at work? Got any leftovers? I'm starving, David smirked wearily. But suddenly, an idea. Mark, the only person he knew who could turn scribbles into actual software. He rushed back to the dorm. Mark was glued to his screen, headphones on, chewing cheap pizza. Mark, I need your help, David said, his tone so serious that Mark pulled his headphones off. Help with what? Did your manager schedule you for a double shift again? David inhaled deeply, then spilled everything. The spilled soup, the CEO's icy glare, the 1 week challenge. Mark's eyes widened, then he burst out laughing. You're insane! Spill soup, fine. But pitching a $1 billion idea to a CEO on the spot. And now you've got 1 week to build a restaurant error management system. You've lost it, man. David stayed quiet, his eyes burning. Maybe. But what if this is the only chance I'll ever get to change my life? You can laugh, but I can't walk away. Mark studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You're stubborn as hell. Fine, 1 week. No sleep, no breaks. But remember, I'll code. The ideas, the workflow, the logic, that's all on you. David nodded firmly. Inside, his determination roared to life. Outside, the city never slept. And in that cramped little dorm room, 2 young men began the journey to turn humiliation into history. That first night, their tiny dorm room glowed until dawn. Empty coffee cans, instant noodle cups, and scribbled notes littered the floor. At the desk, Mark's fingers flew across the keyboard, while David paced with his old notebook, reading ideas out loud. Okay, David said, pointing at a page. Case, wrong dish delivered. The system has to log the mistake, prompt the waiter with an instant apology, and suggest compensation, like a discount or a free dish. Mark grimaced, still typing furiously. Sounds easy when you say it, But do you have any idea how many lines of code it takes for a system to recognize a situation? You think computers just know how to apologize? David smirked. It doesn't need to apologize. It just needs to remind the waiter and offer the right options. That's already a game changer. The keyboard clattered non-stop, the air thick with caffeine and tension. By 3 a.m., Mark groaned. We're building a castle in the sand. You've got nothing but scribbles in that notebook. No restaurant will test this on theory alone. David stayed silent, then pulled out a keychain full of old employee badges. Greasy, frayed, faded with time. My data isn't just on paper. It's in every shift I've worked, every manager's scolding, every customer's disappointed look. I've lived it for 4 years, and I swear I'll turn it into something valuable. Mark stared at the worn-out badges, then sighed. You're insane, but fine, I'll code. Just remember, if I collapse on this desk, it's your fault. For the first time in hours, David smiled. Then let's build a castle this time, on concrete. Outside, dawn crept in through the narrow window. A new day had begun, and so had the race against time. 2 days later, their dorm room looked like a chaotic startup hub. Laptops open, sticky notes plastered on the walls, pizza boxes stacked high, and 2 sleep-deprived faces running on caffeine. Mark slammed a key dramatically and leaned back. Done. The first prototype. It can log mistakes, suggest apologies, and generate discount vouchers automatically. David clapped, eyes gleaming. Perfect. Let's test it. He grabbed his old phone, typed in a scenario. Customer complains food is cold. The system instantly responded. We're sorry. Please enjoy a complimentary dessert, David cheered. Yes! It works! But then he typed the second scenario. Customer got water spilled on their shirt. The screen flashed. We're sorry. Please enjoy. Another glass of water. Mark's eyes bulged. David froze. And then both burst into uncontrollable laughter, collapsing onto the floor. Oh man, if we showed this to the CEO, he'd banish us from New York. Mark wheezed between laughs. David laughed too, but then his expression hardened. It's fine. Mistakes are exactly what we need to fix. Just like the idea itself. If it's wrong, we'll keep working until it's right. Mark stared at him, surprised by the determination in his friend's eyes. You know, I've never seen you this serious before. All right then, let's keep going. The two dove back into the notebook and keyboard. The clatter of typing mixed with laughter and the bubbling of a coffee pot. Their first prototype was a hilarious failure, but it proved one thing. The dream was beginning to breathe. 3 days passed. Dark circles under David and Mark's eyes looked permanent. Their system, nicknamed Fix and Serve, could finally handle a few basic scenarios without turning into a joke. But testing it on a phone wasn't enough. David knew they needed a real stage. We have to test it in a restaurant, David said, his eyes bloodshot but burning with resolve. Mark nearly choked on his coffee. What, in a real restaurant? You want us thrown out? No, David shook his head. I want to prove it can change how customers are treated. That night, they went to a small diner near campus, where David had once worked part-time. The owner, Linda, liked David for his hard work, so when he asked to test a new mistake management software, she shrugged. As long as you don't burn down my diner, go ahead. The dinner rush was packed. David hooked the system into an old tablet at the counter. When a waiter served the wrong dish, the system immediately buzzed. Wrong dish at table 3. Suggestion, apologize plus issue 10% voucher. The manager swooped in, fixed the error, and the customer smiled. Efficient! David beamed. Mark even recorded it on his phone, grinning. It works, David. It actually works! But the joy didn't last. When a difficult customer had soda spilled on her expensive handbag, the system froze and printed. We're sorry. Please accept. A new plastic bag. The diner went silent. Staff froze. The customer glared, and David's face drained of color. Mark whispered, We're dead. David drew a deep breath, rushed to the table, bowed deeply. I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. I'll personally cover your dinner tonight, and tomorrow we'll send your bag to a professional cleaning service. The customer blinked, then slowly nodded. At least you know how to fix a mistake. Relief swept through the diner. Behind the counter, Linda watched David with a small, approving smile. You're not like the other employees I've had. David turned to Mark, whispering, See? The system may fail, but the philosophy never will. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, just make sure it doesn't hand out plastic bags next time. Under the diner's warm yellow lights, David realized the journey would be anything but easy. Yet even from the silliest failures, he felt more certain than ever. He was on the right path. One weekday morning, Richard Grant sat in his 52nd floor office, overlooking the chaos of Wall Street. His assistant, Clara, stepped in, looking hesitant. "Sir, there's something unusual. I think you'll want to see this." Richard didn't look up from his screen, where stock charts flickered endlessly. "Unusual can wait. I'm watching the market. It's about the waiter from La Belle Étoile, sir." Richard finally raised his head, his piercing eyes narrowing. "Ah, the kid. I assumed after the soup incident he'd vanish." Clara handed him an iPad, playing a short video circulating online. In it, David stood inside a small diner, handling a customer complaint. The fix and serve system flashed on screen, suggesting solutions. Though it glitched, David remained calm, confident, turning the situation around and leaving the customer satisfied. "This clip is spreading on a tech forum," Clara explained. "It seems he's actually testing the idea." Richard watched closely, the corner of his mouth curling. He dared to bring it into the real world. Not bad. "Plenty of people talk big but never act," Clara asked carefully. "Shall I ignore it, or?" Richard rested his chin on his hand, eyes glinting with calculation. "No, keep an eye on him. I want to see where he gets in a week. If he crashes, he's just another dreamer. But if he survives..." He paused, sipping his coffee, then smirked. "Then we might be looking at a reckless fool worth investing in." Meanwhile, across town, David had no idea that every step he took was already under the watchful eye of one of Wall Street's biggest sharks. By day 4, the little diner where David tested the system had become an accidental stage. Customers came not just to eat, but to watch the so-called mistake-proof system invented by a mere waiter. Some filmed videos, some smirked, others patted David on the back saying, "Good luck, kid. Dreaming's easy. Doing is hard." Linda, the diner's owner, pulled David into the kitchen after the morning rush. "David, I admire your effort, but people are coming here to watch a show, not to dine. If this works, great, but if you fail in front of them, my diner goes down with you. Are you sure you know what you're doing?" David fell silent. His chest tightened. He didn't want to ruin the place that had once kept him afloat. But determination returned to his eyes. "I promise. If things go wrong, I'll take full responsibility. I don't want to damage your reputation. But please, give me a few more days. This is a chance I can't walk away from." Linda studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Fine, but remember this, David. Opportunity is like hot soup. If you don't handle it right, it'll burn you." Meanwhile, Mark was catching heat from his classmates in the computer science department. A group of students snickered as they spotted him exhausted in the library. "Hey, heard you're coding for a waiter trying to build $1 billion empire. What's next? A robot busboy?" Mark clenched his fists but said nothing. Back at the dorm, he dropped his bag on the desk and sighed. "David, everyone thinks we're a joke, and sometimes I wonder if they're right." David placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "They laugh because they don't see what we see. Mark, we're not just coding an app. We're building a chance for every waiter like me. If we quit now, then all my years of notes, all our sweat, it'll mean nothing." Mark stayed quiet, then nodded slowly. He knew David wasn't bluffing. That fire in his friend's eyes pulled him back to the keyboard, despite the ridicule. Outside, rain poured over New York, mirroring the trials falling on the two young men. But inside their cramped room, the glow of the screen burned bright, like a flame that refused to die. On the 5th evening, while David was helping Linda serve dinner, a woman in a long coat with a camera walked in. She didn't look like a typical customer. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the tablet running Fix and Serve at the counter. After ordering a simple meal, she walked straight up to David. "You're the one who came up with this system?" David froze for a second. "Yes, it's just a trial. Nothing finished yet." The woman smiled, pulling a card from her coat. "I'm Julia Ross, tech journalist for Tech Horizon. I saw the video of you on the forum. Tonight I wanted to see it for myself." Mark nearly dropped a glass. He whispered, "Oh no, that's a major tech outlet. If they write about this, the whole industry will know." David kept calm and invited Julia to sit. While Mark nervously ran the system, David explained the philosophy behind it. A mistake isn't the end. Handled right, it can be the reason a customer remembers a restaurant for its sincerity and professionalism. Just then, almost as if fate was playing a prank, a new staffer dropped a plate of spaghetti. sauce splattering across the floor. Julia raised an eyebrow, waiting to see how David would respond. The Fix and Serve tablet buzzed. Error. Dish dropped. Suggestion. Apologize. Plus, free replacement dish. Plus, 15% discount voucher for next visit. David acted immediately, apologizing, offering a new dish, and handing over the voucher. The customer laughed. Wow, I've never seen a restaurant react this fast. I'll definitely come back, Julia observed, jotting notes, then nodded. You've got something interesting here. But remember, this tech world is ruthless. Once I write, you won't be an unknown waiter anymore. You'll be challenged by giants. David froze, then smiled. If they challenge me, that's all the more reason to prove this idea deserves to exist. Julia chuckled, slipping her camera away. I like that kind of recklessness. See you in print, David. As she left, Mark stood stunned. You realize if that article comes out, we won't just get attention. We'll be in a fight. David lifted his head, eyes blazing. Then let them come. I'm ready. On the 6th morning, David was dozing over the keyboard when Mark suddenly shouted, David! You've got to see this. David jerked awake. On Mark's laptop screen was the front page of Tech Horizon. Featured front and center was an article titled, From Spilled Soup to a $1 billion Startup. The Waiter Challenging the Restaurant Industry. Julia Ross's article recounted the soup incident at La Belle Étoile, David's bold exchange with Richard Grant, and the test run at the diner. Photos showed David apologizing to a customer, while the Fix and Serve system displayed suggestions on the tablet. This idea may be ridiculous or revolutionary, Julia wrote. But one thing is certain, the young waiter isn't just talking, he's taking action. The piece spread like wildfire. Tech forums exploded with comments. Some mocked, startup powered by noodles and discount coupons. Comedy gold. Others were intrigued. If this works, it could transform the service industry. David's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from old co-workers, friends, even strangers. Read the article, David. You're famous now. Stop dreaming, come back to reality. If you need a restaurant to test in, count me in. Linda appeared from behind the counter, holding a fresh newspaper. She set it down before David, her eyes both worried and proud. You're playing a big game now, David. Make sure you know what you're up against. David held the paper, his hands trembling. His heart raced with both fear and excitement. In just days, from the shame of spilled soup, he had become the focus of the tech world. Mark leaned in, whispering, You realize what this means, right? It's not just Richard anymore. Now the whole world is waiting to see if we fail or make history. David lifted his head, eyes steady. Then we have no way back. We have to win. That afternoon, while David was clearing tables at Linda's diner, a sleek black car pulled up outside. A sharply dressed driver stepped in, his presence cutting through the chatter. David Miller? He asked in a steady, deep voice. David looked up, startled. Yes, that's me. The driver handed him a small envelope. Mr. Richard Grant would like to meet you. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. The location is written inside, and don't be late. Without waiting for a response, the man turned and left, leaving the diner in heavy silence. Linda frowned. David, this could be an opportunity. Or a trap. You need to be careful. Mark practically jumped out of his seat. Do you realize what this means? He's summoning you like a CEO, not a waiter. But what if we're not ready? What if he humiliates you in front of everyone? David opened the envelope. Inside was a luxurious embossed card that read, Richard Grant invites David Miller to a private meeting at Conference Hall, 40th floor, Grant Tower. David clenched the card, his heart pounding. This wasn't just an invitation. This was the battleground the Wall Street titan had set for him. Mark, David said, eyes blazing. We have less than 24 hours. The prototype may not be perfect, but I need to prove it has a soul. This is my moment to turn a promise into reality, Mark groaned, clutching his hair. You're going to kill me. But fine. If you're reckless, I'll be reckless with you. That night, their dorm room glowed once again. They weren't just two broke students coding. They were preparing for a showdown that would decide whether the world would call them a joke or pioneers. That night, their cramped dorm room turned into a battlefield. Sticky notes covered the walls. Laptop screens glowed, and streams of code poured across the monitor like a rain of characters. Mark hunched over the keyboard, his fingers numb. If this thing suggests handing out plastic bags again, we're finished. I'm adding a new algorithm to classify mistakes by severity. David stood beside him, notebook in hand, jotting more notes. Right. A small slip-up like a wrong dish only needs an apology and maybe a free dessert. But a serious mistake, like damaging a customer's property, needs real compensation, a free meal or follow-up service. Mark nodded, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. I'll add an override for managers. Let them choose the right fix quickly instead of letting the system spit out nonsense. Outside, rain pattered, wind whistled through the window, reminders that time was racing by. Around 3 a.m., David slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Mark, what if Richard only brought me in to humiliate me? What if he just wants to prove I'm a foolish dreamer? Mark paused his typing, then turned to him. David, maybe you'll fail, but you've done what most people never dare, turning a mistake into an opportunity. Even if he rejects you, the world has already seen your story. And one day someone will believe. David's eyes shone with emotion. He nodded firmly. Then we finish this. As dawn broke, golden light filled the room. On the screen, Fix and Serve version 2.0 ran smoothly. No silly errors, a clean interface, ready for the spotlight. David stared at it, drawing in a deep breath. Tomorrow, in front of Richard, I won't just be a waiter. I'll be a founder. Night fell, and New York glowed with lights, the city alive as if it never slept. Before the towering Grant Tower, David and Mark paused. The skyscraper loomed like a fortress of steel and glass, where billion-dollar decisions were made. Mark whispered, "We're really walking into the lion's den." David straightened his freshly ironed shirt, shoes polished to a shine despite their age. His heart pounded, but his eyes showed no fear. Then we'd better leave with a prize. They entered the grand lobby, cold, imposing, marble floors gleaming. Employees in tailored suits walked past, casting glances of curiosity and disdain. Two scrappy students with an old laptop hardly fit in. David Miller, a receptionist, called. "Yes, that's me. Mr. Grant is expecting you on the 40th floor. This way, please." The elevator shot upward like a rocket. Mark clutched his backpack, muttering, "If this elevator crashes, at least we won't have to pitch." David chuckled softly, easing the tension. When the doors opened, a vast conference hall stretched out. Crystal chandeliers glittered above. A long walnut table gleamed below. At its head sat Richard Grant, regal as a judge. Beside him, 3 men in dark suits, clearly advisors or financiers. "Welcome, David Miller," Richard's voice boomed, calm yet commanding. "I see you didn't run away." "Good." David stepped forward, placing his laptop on the table, eyes burning bright. "I came to keep my promise, sir." Richard arched an eyebrow, a cold smile tugging at his lips. "Then prove it, and remember, in this room, even the smallest mistake could cost you everything." The air was thick enough to hear a heartbeat. David opened the laptop, the screen glowing with the words, "Fix and Serve 2.0. Tonight, he was no longer a trembling waiter, he was a founder, ready to pitch to an empire. David opened his laptop, hands slightly trembling, but his voice growing steady. "Mr. Grant, gentlemen, I present to you Fix and Serve 2.0, the first platform designed to turn mistakes in restaurants into opportunities to retain customers." The screen displayed a simple interface, a dashboard with error, suggested action, severity level. "Mistakes are inevitable," David went on. "But instead of hiding or blaming, Fix and Serve logs them instantly, provides specific actions, and turns the mishap into a positive experience." One advisor raised an eyebrow. "Sounds nice, but how does your system distinguish between a minor slip and a major screw-up?" David smiled, clicked a button. On screen appeared a simulation. Wrong dish served. The system suggested, "Apologize plus offer free dessert." Then he entered another scenario. Customer's personal item damaged. This time, the system displayed, "Apologize plus comp meal plus arrange repair compensation." "As you can see," David explained, "we categorize errors by severity and context. Small mistakes require quick apologies. Major ones demand real restitution." Mark sat in the back, heart pounding like a drum. He could barely breathe as the advisors exchanged glances. Richard tapped his finger slowly on the table. "But why would restaurants pay for this? They're used to staff muttering apologies and moving on." David drew a deep breath. This was the critical moment. "Sir, customers don't remember shallow apologies. They remember how they were treated. Losing one angry customer can cost thousands in the future. But if that same customer leaves respected, with a reason to return, the value multiplies. Fix and Serve doesn't just handle mistakes, it protects long-term profit." Silence hung in the room. One advisor gave a subtle nod. Another still sat back, skeptical. Richard leaned back, his gaze sharp as a blade. You make a good argument, but arguments are cheap. I want proof. Show me Fix and Serve working in a real situation, right now. The air froze. Mark broke into a sweat. David, however, smiled, pressed a key, and prepared to face the biggest test of his life.
Richard motioned to one of his advisors. A salt and pepper-haired man stood, his voice calm but challenging. All right, kid. Pretend this is your restaurant. I'll be the customer, and I'm not easy to please. He sat, folded his arms, and barked like a diner in a crowded restaurant. Hey, I ordered rare steak. Why are you bringing me this well-done rubber? I'm not paying for this garbage. The words echoed through the conference room. Mark paled, but David took a steady breath and entered. Customer complaint, wrong doneness of steak. The screen displayed, Apologize Plus replace dish with correct order free of charge plus issue 10% discount voucher for next visit. David stepped forward, acting as if he were serving. Sir, I sincerely apologize for the mistake. I'll immediately bring you the rare steak you requested, and your next dinner will come with a special discount. The advisor stared, then gave a small nod. Acceptable. Immediately, the second advisor jumped in, voice sharp. And what about me? I've been waiting 40 minutes and my food still isn't here. Is your restaurant planning to starve me? David quickly typed, customer complaint, excessive wait time. Fix and Serve responded, apologize plus serve complimentary appetizer immediately plus discount on main dish. David replied smoothly, I'm very sorry for the delay. I'll serve you a complimentary appetizer right away so you don't wait longer, and your main course will come with a special discount. The second advisor raised his brows, surprised. Quick thinking. Richard, arms folded, his eyes cold as steel, tapped the table slowly before speaking. And me, let's see if you can handle this. My $1,000 suit just had an entire bottle of red wine spilled on it by your staff. What now? The room froze. David's heartbeat thundered. This was the nightmare scenario, and the very incident that had started it all. David placed his hand on the laptop, locking eyes with Richard. Then, sir, I'll show you that Fix and Serve was born to handle this very moment. The conference room was strung tight with tension. Richard folded his arms, eyes sharp as blades, testing David to the core. David quickly typed into the laptop, customer's expensive suit ruined by spilled red wine. Fix and Serve processed, then displayed. Sincere apology plus comp entire meal plus arrange professional cleaning, a cover restoration costs plus provide VIP voucher for next visit. David read it aloud, then looked directly at Richard, his voice clear and firm. Sir, I would immediately take responsibility, comp your entire meal, arrange premium cleaning services for your suit tonight, and on your next visit, you'd receive a complimentary VIP experience to show how much we value you. The room fell silent. The advisors exchanged glances, one nodding slightly, another frowning but unable to dismiss the logic. Richard didn't answer right away. He stood, circling the table slowly, eyes locked on David as if trying to pierce through him. Then, suddenly, he chuckled. Do you even know how much a suit like this costs? Richard asked, half mocking, half challenging. David replied instantly, without hesitation, more than I'll ever own in my life. But customer trust is priceless. If you lose that, no suit, no matter the cost, can fix it. A beat of silence. Then Richard burst into booming laughter, echoing across the crystal-lit room. Well done, waiter. You don't just use the system, you understand the spirit behind it. Mark exhaled so loudly he almost collapsed into his chair. One advisor spoke, this idea, it's not bad. If scaled, it could set a new standard in hospitality. But another remained cold. He still lacks funding, team, experience. A clever idea doesn't guarantee success. Richard raised a hand, silencing them. His gaze drilled back into David. You've passed the trial. But don't think this is the end. I'll give you a chance, but the price of that chance won't be cheap. David swallowed hard, but his eyes blazed. He knew the moment of reckoning was near. Richard sank back into his chair, chest rising and falling as if he'd just enjoyed a fine show. He crossed his arms, his eyes no longer just cold, but tinged with curiosity. David Miller, Richard began slowly. You have potential. But potential alone doesn't build a company. I'll give you a chance, but here are the terms. He paused, locking eyes with David, his voice dropping lower. In 30 days, you must convince at least 10 restaurants to use Fix and Serve. No fancy contracts. I want real proof, evidence that they implemented it, and that it made a difference. If you succeed, I'll invest. If you don't. Richard smirked, his smile like ice. You go back to being a waiter. And this time, try not to spill the soup. Mark nearly shouted. 30 days? 10 restaurants? David, that's insane. David sat still, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles whitened. His mind flashed through memories, grueling shifts, angry customers, scribbled notes in his old notebook. And now, all of it funneled into this moment. He lifted his head, voice firm and clear. I accept. The room went silent. Richard narrowed his eyes, as if weighing whether David understood the trap he'd just walked into. Then suddenly, he burst into booming laughter, echoing through the hall. Good. You're not just reckless, you're recklessly committed. I like that. He clapped once. Clara, draft a provisional agreement. If he proves value in 30 days, we'll discuss investment. If not, we've lost nothing but a few hours of entertainment. Clara nodded, her gaze flickering with both curiosity and admiration toward David. Under the table, David squeezed Mark's hand, whispering, 30 days. We'll turn this challenge into the beginning of a revolution. Mark muttered back, or the beginning of our funeral. But both of them knew there was no turning back now. As the elevator doors closed, sealing Richard and his advisors from view, David and Mark finally exhaled, hearts still hammering like they'd just run through a storm. Mark leaned against the wall, gasping. David, do you realize what we just agreed to? 30 days. 10 restaurants. This isn't a school project, it's suicide. David stayed quiet for a moment. The elevator lights cast his reflection on the steel walls, exhausted face, but eyes burning with fire. No, Mark. This is opportunity. He thinks we'll collapse, but that's exactly why we can't. If we succeed, not just Richard, but the whole world, will see us differently. The elevator dinged open. They stepped into the bustling lobby of Grant Tower. Suits rushed past, carrying million-dollar deals. No one noticed the two scrappy kids with worn shirts and a battered laptop. But only they knew they were carrying a ticking time bomb, 30 days to survive. Outside, the New York night wind cut sharp and cold. Mark pulled his collar up, muttering, I swear, if I survive these 30 days, I'll never touch cold pizza at 3 a.m. again. David laughed, a little wildly. You'll eat more than cold pizza. You'll celebrate with champagne. And this time, no one spilling it on a chute. They looked at each other and burst out laughing in the freezing air. Then David lifted his head toward the gleaming skyline and whispered, 30 days. It starts now. And they walked off into the night, carrying the weight of a gamble, but fueled by a fire no wind could extinguish. The next morning, their messy dorm room turned into a war room. David spread a map of New York across the table, marking restaurants where he had once worked or made connections. Listen, David said, eyes blazing like a commander. We can't start with luxury restaurants. They'll laugh in our faces. We begin with the small places, the ones where I worked. At least there, they know I'm not a fraud. Mark leaned over, chin on his hand, staring at the red circles. How many total? 17, David answered. We need at least 10. The odds aren't great, but I'd rather bet on familiar ground than knock on strangers' doors. Mark sighed. Fine. But we need a quick demo. No one's going to sit through a 30-minute lecture. David nodded, opening his laptop. We'll create a streamlined Fix and Serve 2.0, something a restaurant owner can see results from in seconds. They dove in. Keyboard clatter filled the room, interrupted only by Mark's muttering, I should have stuck to my algorithms assignment instead of saving the restaurant industry with you. David chuckled. If this works, your professor will read about it in the news anyway. That afternoon, they headed to Mama Rosa's, a small Italian diner where David once washed dishes. Mama Rosa, stout and stern-eyed, crossed her arms, glaring down at him. David, the last time you worked here, you broke 10 plates in one night. And now you come back talking about a billion-dollar idea? You think I'll buy that? David swallowed hard, bowing low. You're right. I made mistakes. But those mistakes are what led me to create Fix and Serve. Please, just give me one chance to prove it. Mark held up the tablet, its screen glowing with Fix and Serve's interface. 2 minutes. If it doesn't work, we'll leave right away. Mama Rosa squinted, studying the two scrappy boys, then sighed. Fine. 2 minutes. But if you spill 1 drop of water in my diner, you're out. David and Mark exchanged a nervous glance, then said in unison, Deal. And so, the 30-day war officially began. Mama Rosa stood stiff by the counter, eyes drilling into the two young men. Customers chatted noisily, unaware that tonight, this humble diner was about to become a live experiment. David set up Fix and Serve 2.0 on a tablet, connecting it to the restaurant's simple system. Mark sat behind him, trembling like it was exam day. All right, David inhaled. Trial run starts now. Almost on cue, a waitress stumbled and spilled a tray of water all over a woman's white dress. The diner froze. Oh no, not again. She's going to walk out for sure. Mama Rosa frowned, ready to intervene, when Fix and Serve buzzed. Error. Spilled drink on customer. Suggestion. Immediate apology plus cover dry cleaning plus 20% off bill. David handed the tablet to the waitress, whispering, Just follow it. She bowed nervously. I'm so sorry. We'll cover the dry cleaning for your dress and take 20% off your bill tonight. The customer, instead of exploding, blinked in surprise and chuckled. At least you know how to make it right. Fine, I accept. Applause broke out across the diner. Even Mama Rosa's jaw dropped. But the test wasn't over. Another customer raised his voice. Hey, I ordered seafood pizza, and you brought me vegetarian. What kind of service is this? Fix and Serve buzzed again. Error. Wrong dish. Suggestion. Apologize plus replace order free of charge plus add small appetizer. David stepped forward, delivering the apology and promise. Minutes later, a steaming seafood pizza arrived with complimentary bruschetta. The customer smiled, while nearby diners whispered, Service here feels different now. Mama Rosa folded her arms again, but this time her frown had softened. HMPH. Not bad. This thing might save me some headaches. But are you sure it won't make me look like a fool? David smiled firmly. It will turn mistakes into reasons customers come back. That's my promise. She stared at him for a long moment, then burst into laughter. You're as reckless as when you used to wait tables here. Fine. I'll let you run Fix and Serve in my diner for a month. Let's see if this so-called billion-dollar idea is worth a dime. David and Mark exchanged looks, hearts pounding. They had their first restaurant. Only 9 more to turn a wild promise into reality. Within just 2 days of testing, Mama Rosa's was no longer just a small Italian diner. Customers flocked in, not for the pizza or spaghetti, but because they heard the place had a magic system that turned mistakes into fun experiences. A young couple filmed a TikTok where the boyfriend pretended to complain about cold food. Fix and Serve buzzed with a suggestion for compensation. The girlfriend laughed. Wow, this is the only restaurant I've seen that actually pays up for mistakes. The clip went viral, gaining tens of thousands of views within hours. Mama Rosa was half thrilled, half worried. David, what have you done? My diner's turning into a lab for the whole internet. David grinned, but his voice was firm. Mrs. Rosa, this is exactly the effect we need. Curiosity brings customers. Meanwhile, at the university, Mark found himself surrounded by classmates. Some mocked. Hey, heard you coded an app that apologizes for waiters. But others leaned in with interest. Can I see it? If this works for restaurants, maybe it could help in retail too. Mark was surprised. He hadn't imagined David's idea sparking curiosity outside the restaurant world. That night, in their dorm room, David scrolled through social media comments. Some mocked, instant noodle startup. Watch them crash. But others brimmed with hope. This is what the service industry needs. I want Fix and Serve in my cafe. David turned to Mark, eyes gleaming. See, we've only just begun, and the ripple is spreading. This isn't just about one diner anymore. This is our chance to reach the whole city. Mark sighed, pouring another cup of coffee. Yeah, as long as we survive the 30 days first. Outside, the New York night blazed with lights, just like the opportunities waiting to be seized. And Fix and Serve, once a scribble in a battered notebook, was now the spark of an entire wave of curiosity. 3 days after the Mama Rosa's trial, David and Mark had their first trophy. 1 restaurant signed on to Fix and Serve. But they knew the remaining 9 would be the real test. In their dorm room, David spread the list of Mark diners. He pointed at the map. We divide into 3 targets. 1. Small joints like Mama Rosa's, easy in, because they know me. 2. Mid-sized restaurants, where reputation with regulars matters. 3. 1 big restaurant, just 1, but enough to give us credibility. Mark grimaced. A big restaurant? David, they'll throw us out before you finish a sentence. David's eyes lit up with fire. Exactly. But without a big win, we are just another internet joke. I won't let Richard look down on me again. And so began their door-to-door campaign. At a small burger joint near campus, David convinced the owner Fix and Serve could cut down on complaints from college kids. The owner chuckled. Complaints are part of the business. But if your app keeps me from getting yelled at every night, fine, I'll try it. At a modest sushi bar, the chef was surprised when the system suggested the perfect response to a customer unhappy with bland rice. He bowed slightly, smiling. If this keeps guests from leaving, I'll use it. Mark tallied each handshake, each small agreement. Within a week, they had 5 restaurants on board. But the biggest challenge loomed ahead. Le Monde, a famed French restaurant in Midtown. Years ago, they had rejected David's application to be a waiter. Now he was back, not begging for a job, but pitching a wild idea. Standing before the gleaming glass doors, Mark whispered, David, if we fail here, it won't just be a no, it'll be a slap in the face. David clutched his battered laptop, drawing a deep breath. Then let's make sure we walk in, and don't walk out empty-handed. They pushed the doors open, chandeliers blazing overhead, as the most important battle yet began. Le Monde, a renowned French restaurant in Midtown, host to politicians, CEOs, and even Hollywood stars. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, white tablecloths glistened, and violins filled the air. Every detail radiated perfection, leaving no room for a speck of dust. David and Mark stepped in, instantly feeling the scrutinizing gaze of the black-suited hostess. Excuse me, she raised a brow. Do you have a reservation? David inhaled and smiled. We are not here to dine. We are here to meet the manager. I have a proposal that can make Le Monde a pioneer. The hostess smirked faintly, clearly unconvinced. But seeing David's determination, she reluctantly called. Moments later, a tall, gaunt man with a stern face appeared. His name tag read, Philippe, General Manager. Who are you? Philippe asked, his French-accented English sharp. I remember a young man named David Miller applied here years ago as a waiter, and was immediately rejected. David flushed but stayed composed. That's right. And today, I return not to beg for a job, but to bring a solution Le Monde has never seen. Philippe folded his arms, eyes narrowing. A Michelin-level restaurant like ours doesn't need solutions from a former busboy. You think you can teach us hospitality? Mark clenched his backpack, whispering, David, let's just leave. But David stepped forward, eyes blazing. No, I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to show you that even the most perfect places make mistakes. And how you handle those mistakes, that's what keeps customers coming back. Fix and Serve is the key. Philippe gave a dismissive laugh. Sounds more like a gimmick than a business tool. David opened his laptop, the screen glowing with Fix and Serve 2.0. If you allow, I'll prove it right now. Just one simulated scenario. If it fails to convince you, we'll walk away immediately. The grand hall fell silent. A few diners lifted their heads curiously. Philippe arched a brow, then smirked. Very well, waiter boy. Show me what's so special about your so-called key. And the test at Le Monde officially began. Philippe tapped the table lightly, eyes sharp as a hawk. Very well. Let's see how amusing your little game really is. He turned to a nearby waiter. Imagine a guest orders a rare Bordeaux 1982, but the staff mistakenly brings a cheap bottle worth 10 times less. The guest discovers it, enraged, threatening to blast the restaurant in the press. What then? Nearby diners gasped, whispering, "That's a nightmare scenario for any restaurant." Mark leaned in, whispering, "We are doomed. This is a death trap." David drew a steady breath, typed the scenario into Fix and Serve. The screen spun for a few seconds before displaying. Immediate Apology Plus replace with correct vintage free of charge plus comp entire meal plus offer private VIP dining voucher for next visit plus formal apology letter from management. David raised his head, his voice carrying through the hall. "Mr. Philippe, not only would we bring the correct bottle free of charge, but we'd comp the entire meal to prove goodwill. In addition, the guest would receive a formal letter of apology from management and an invitation to dine in our private VIP room on their next visit, to feel truly valued." The hall fell silent. Several diners looked wide-eyed. A middle-aged gentleman at a nearby table chuckled. "Honestly, if a restaurant treated me like that, I'd come back. Not for the wine, but because they valued me." Philippe frowned, clearly torn. He'd meant to crush David, yet the crowd's reaction leaned heavily in the boy's favor. David pressed on, calm but firm. Le Monde is known for perfection. But a mistake like this, if handled poorly, could destroy your reputation. Fix and Serve doesn't undermine your pride, it protects it. The hall buzzed with murmurs of approval. Philippe clenched his fists, then gave a small nod. Very well, boy. You've convinced not only this room, but even me." Mark nearly jumped with joy, while David simply bowed with a faint smile. Philippe said slowly, "Fine. I'll allow you to test Fix and Serve here at Le Monde. But remember, this is a grand stage. If you fail, the whole city will laugh." David answered, voice steady, "If I fail, I'll own it. But if I succeed, Le Monde will be the pioneer." None of the diners knew it, but this marked the 6th restaurant in the 30-day trial, and David's first step onto the true big stage. On Fix and Serve's first day at Le Monde, David and Mark could barely breathe. This wasn't a cozy diner or a sushi bar. This was the stage where every guest had the money, power, and ego to destroy a restaurant's reputation with a single article. David hovered by the system, eyes glued to the screen. Mark clutched the tablet in the corner like a man bracing for impact. At first, everything ran smoothly. Wine poured elegantly, foie gras served flawlessly, waiters gliding like dancers. David began to relax, until the first mishap struck. A young, flashy guest suddenly snapped. "Excuse me, but this is not the knife I requested. I asked for Japanese steel, not French." The room froze. A minor issue, but in the hands of a customer like this, it could become a disaster. Philippe shot David a look that screamed, "Let's see you handle this." Fix and Serve buzzed with a suggestion. Apologize plus replace knife immediately plus complimentary dessert selected by the chef. David nodded, whispering to the waiter, "Swap the knife, and tell him tonight's dessert will be a personal apology from a chef." The guest raised a brow, but when the gleaming Japanese knife arrived with the promise of a free dessert, he smirked. "Fine. Let's see what your chef can do." The murmurs died down. An older diner nearby whispered, "At least they handle it quickly. Not bad." Mark exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. 1 point for Fix and Serve. But within half an hour, the second crisis hit. A wealthy businesswoman discovered her wine glass had a tiny crack. She shot up, voice sharp as steel. "Le Monde, the famed restaurant of New York, serves me with a cracked glass? Do you take me for a fool?" The room buzzed, diners whispering, phones raised to record. Philippe's face tightened. David typed frantically into Fix and Serve, "Customer finds cracked glass, feels insulted." The screen glowed. Immediate Apology Plus replace entire glass set plus comp current bottle of wine plus private tour of wine cellar. David rushed over, bowing low. "Madam, my deepest apologies. Not only will we replace the glassware, but please allow us to gift you this bottle and invite you for an exclusive tour of Le Monde's wine cellar as our honored guest." The room held its breath. The woman frowned, then slowly smiled in triumph. "A private wine cellar tour? Very well. I'll give Le Monde another chance." Relief swept through the hall. Some even applauded. Philippe stared at David, this time, with a glimmer of respect. Mark whispered, voice shaky, "We just dodged a PR bomb. But if every day is like this, I'll die of a heart attack before the 30 days are up." David only smiled, eyes blazing. No, Mark. This is why we have to win. Every crisis we handle makes Fix and Serve one step closer to being indispensable. And right there in Le Monde, Fix and Serve turned potential disasters into a performance that had the whole city watching. Within just 3 nights of Fix and Serve running at Le Monde, the entire city was buzzing. Diners left with satisfied smiles, and many shared their stories online. My wine glass had a crack. I thought I'd cause a scene, but Le Monde replaced the entire set, gave me a free bottle, and even invited me to their private wine cellar. Now this is service. The post went viral, thousands of shares in hours. Food blogs quickly picked it up. Le Monde reinvents the art of apology. 5-star service just leveled up. In their dorm, David and Mark stared at the screen, speechless. Mark rubbed his eyes. We made it into the news? And not as a joke, but as praise. David laughed, a mix of disbelief and joy. Mark, this is just the beginning. The more curious people get, the more Fix and Serve becomes the center of attention. But attention brought pressure. Philippe called David that night, his voice sharp. Miller, Le Monde will not be a lab rat for the press. If Fix and Serve tarnishes my restaurant's prestige, you're out. David answered calmly, Sir, give me time. Today they call it an experiment. Tomorrow, they'll call it a service revolution. Silence lingered, then Philippe replied coldly, You have 27 days left. Don't make me regret this. Meanwhile, a major business journal ran a headline, A Student-Built App Shaking New York's Restaurant Industry. In his high-rise office, Richard Grant read the article on his tablet, an amused smile tugging at his lips. HMH, the waiter doesn't fall so easily. But let's see how long he lasts in a real storm. Public opinion split quickly. Skeptics mocked David as a startup dreamer, while supporters hailed him as a game changer. And David, staring at the list with 4 restaurants left to secure, whispered, We are halfway there. Now, there's no room for mistakes.